Hello and welcome back to the blockchain.com podcast. My name is Garrick Heilman. I'm the head of research at blockchain.com and a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics. Today I'm joined by blockchain.com co-founder and vice chairman Nick Carey. As part of our Crypto Basics mini-series, today we're unpacking the term Web3, the so-called future state of the internet. The term Web3 encompasses a multitude of areas spanning crypto, non-fungible tokens, decentralized autonomous organizations, DeFi or decentralized finance, and even the Metaverse. By the end of today's episode, you'll find out what are the key differences between Web 1, Web 2, and what we're now calling Web 3, where the term Web 3 came from, and how to decipher the Web 3 buzz and hype so you can get more involved and know how to navigate the space. So Nick, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Garrick. Well, we've got a lot of terms to define today, but I think we'll need to take a little trip down memory lane and maybe revisit what the difference is between Web 1 and Web 2.0 when analysts and industry experts sort of talk about that. So maybe give us your definition for what Web 1 was and then how it evolved and sort of gave new tools and enabled new business models in the form of Web 2.
Yep. So very, very high level history tour through the internet and Web 1 and Web 2. So the internet and when it began is something that's debated. We look at the introduction of foundational protocols like TCP/IP in the early 1970s as kind of a key milestone in the history of the internet. But many people consider the web to have started, of course, with Tim Berners-Lee, and that all kind of took off in the 1990s. And a lot of the original thinking around this early web, Web 1 as we call it, was that this would be open source and decentralized and permissionless. A lot of the things you hear about today's cryptocurrency system. However, starting in the early 2000s, we had the rise of what we call Web 2. And this is where we really see platforms like Facebook coming into existence and really building kind of more tightly controlled walled gardens where there is permission and restrictions on access and things are kind of siloed into fiefdoms, so to speak, controlled by today's big tech companies. And many of the early folks involved with the internet looked on that as something that was problematic and have gotten really excited about the prospect of returning to something more like Web 1, a more open, permissionless, decentralized, less tightly controlled by a tech oligopoly kind of internet system. So that's at a high level kind of what the differences are between Web 1, Web 2, and what people think Web 3 could be like. And Nick, I'll just turn to you now. Maybe you could share your perspectives on Web 2 and what are some of the problems with it.
Yeah. So if Web 1 was sort of a world where anyone could go out and discover and read and host their own server and set up their own email client, Web 2 sort of centralized a lot of the web experience, standardized user experiences, but also started to aggregate enormous amounts of personal identifying information, search criteria, metadata, and more. And that became extraordinarily valuable. The Web 2 companies that you mentioned, businesses like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and YouTube, really turned user behavior into a commodity that those businesses would then extrapolate precious information from and then use that to advertise to people. And so I've got sort of a story that's kind of interesting. In 2005 or 6, I was an intern for a tech company, and we were working on ad software. And one of the pieces of technology we were developing was looking at different weather patterns in the United States and then geo-targeting advertisements for people searching for example, different type of clothing. So you might go to an online shop and search for a red jacket, but decide not to buy it. And a cookie would be placed on the website that you visited on your computer. And then what we would do is a week later, detecting that there was a winter storm that had was coming into your area, would serve an advertisement with the same red jacket you looked at in that e-commerce store a week earlier saying, bundle up, it's going to get cold. Now that's where the technology was almost 20 years ago. The advancement of all of the data that has been essentially aggregated in these large tech platforms is now really being called into question. And so the pendulum in many ways is swinging back the other way to make sure that individuals and users have more control and agency over the footprint they're leaving on the internet. So, in a lot of ways, the challenges on both the policy, the security, and the privacy side that we're experiencing today, everything from what kind of data is true on social media and whether or not that the information and the footprint we leave is being used against us, I think are very valid concerns and questions. And so, especially when the users themselves become, their precious sort of personal search history and everything else becomes what is mined. Where does your personal agency on the internet sort of where are the lines where a business has responsibility over using that information appropriately and when not? And so there's a bucket load of regulation, and that is coming down the pipeline both in Europe. You've seen that in the form of GDPR passed recently, and then also in the United States, real discussion on Capitol Hill about these tech monopolies and whether or not they've sort of overstretched their mandates. And so the problem with Web 2 in a lot of ways is that we've just seen repercussions, I would say, from the technological design and a lack of competition in the market. And those should be concerning for any society that wants to develop an innovative entrepreneurial environment. So we're moving on now, and there's a conversation about Web3. So if you think about the evolution of any technological movement, there's sort of improvements. So Web 1 happens, Web 2 happens. We learn about some things that we're not happy about, so we start to revisit maybe what are some of the ingredients we would want to have if we could reimagine a better form of the internet, where maybe you can read and write, you can read and write and own some of the content that you are personally contributing on the internet. And that's where things get pretty interesting, because now we have the emergence of new business models. So maybe, Garrick, I'd love to ask you, what does Web3 mean to you, and where does the term Web3 or Web 3.0 come from?
Yep. No, I'm really glad you brought in the data point, because I think ownership of data is really a crucial part of kind of what people are imagining Web3 could be. And as part of that, data has become incredibly valuable. Data is often described as the new oil, this incredibly valuable asset or commodity that today, that value really accrues to the major platforms that we've mentioned, the Facebooks of the world, that hold our data, and individuals who are contributing to those platforms, using them, certainly getting some services and value for free often from the major tech platforms. There's still maybe an imbalance between how much value is accruing to the big platform versus to the individual. And I think one of the things that blockchain technology certainly could help facilitate in a Web3 world is this idea of individuals having not only just more control from a privacy perspective of their data, but actually being able to benefit financially, from a value perspective more around what they're contributing to, the internet and what they're sharing, and getting more value out of that. So that's a big part of kind of what it means potentially for me, and what's exciting about it. In terms of where the term Web3 comes from, we're going to go to Gavin Wood, Ethereum co-founder, founder of the Polkadot network, all the way back in 2014. Around the same time, he introduced to me a very helpful example of what is a smart contract. I've used this in my teaching for years, the idea of a GPS collar around a dog, kind of uploading data to a smart contract to automate payments to a dog walker. Gavin also coined the term Web3 back around 2014. And so it's been out there for a while, but I think the reason it hasn't really caught on and become a buzzword until more recent times is because a lot of what we kind of imagine as Web3, things like decentralized file storage and decentralized computation and other non-monetary kind of broader use cases of blockchain technology, really haven't come to the forefront until recently, and become more part of the kind of crypto story. So that's why I think that term is helpful, because it speaks to a world beyond just financial services and DeFi, another topic we'll be covering in our Crypto Basics series, and speaks to things that sometimes don't have anything to do with money and are more about just kind of a broader kind of reconstruction and reimagination of the internet as we know it, and services like social media, file storage, et cetera, that are not necessarily financial services applications.
Great. Yeah, Gavin has always sort of been I would say, a thought leader on that space, and it's always interesting to hear his perspectives. So I think, like, if we look at it also realistically today, there's certainly a lot of noise and in the space. And so, what are some current concerns around Web3, the vocabulary that's being used? Can you elaborate a little bit about that so we can present a balanced perspective today?
Yeah, so this term Web3 is certainly a hotly debated term, and there's different views on what's being described as Web3. Some very positive, and some more critical. And some of the more high-profile criticism has actually come from inside the cryptocurrency community. In some ways, you've seen Jack Dorsey, for example, the founder of Twitter. Elon Musk, criticizing the concept of Web3 and whether it's really going to deliver on its promise in terms of its level of decentralization. You've seen some people who have historically also been very critical of crypto, also joining the kind of the bandwagon criticizing Web3. So I think in some ways some of this isn't totally new. There have been critics of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency, of course, through the years. And some of this criticism is just a carryover from that earlier criticism to this new term Web3. I think it also speaks to the fact that the internet is such an incredibly important, technology that has such a huge and growing impact on all our lives that labels matter. And frankly, I think Web3 is a very successful positive framing of what's happening with the evolution of blockchain technology starting to eat away at this kind of centralized Web 2 world. And some people don't like that. And so there's going to be some contentious arguments around this. And that's kind of at a high level where the concern is. Getting more specific into the concerns, I think there's questions around how decentralized is Web3, and it's a fair point. I think Bitcoin is held up today as one of the most decentralized networks in the world, but it didn't start off that way. Satoshi Nakamoto founded it. Could have been a single individual in the beginning operating it. It's become more decentralized over time, and I think that's kind of the thing I would argue with the critics of Web3 is that it's not realistic to expect new protocols, new applications that are being built to be kind of fully decentralized from day one. That's just not how this works. It's a process, and it's true that today a lot of Web3 is probably less decentralized than the founders and many in the community would like to see it get to eventually. So concerns about how safe it is. We've seen, of course, new technology. Like any new technology, there's bugs, there's things that can go wrong, and it's important to kind of, I think, underline the experimental nature of where Web3 is today for anyone kind of looking to get into it. In the DeFi space, for example, we've seen, exploits and hacks and losses of funds. So I think, again, anyone listening to this needs to understand that Web3 is still pretty new and it's being battle tested as we go. And you do need to kind of do your own research and understand what are the risks involved with participating in Web3?
So one of the things we're hearing now is that Web3 basically may enable some emergent new business models where participants in the network can actually share in some of the economic benefits of the activity within that network. So let's talk a little bit about what that might look like. I think there's a real strong argument that Web2 incumbents are concerned about a change to their own business models. So can Web3 maybe bring an end to some of the tech giants of Web 2.0? And maybe what would like a Web3 social media platform maybe look like? Is it possible that there'd be a competitor out there to a Twitter or a Facebook someday? Is that a reality that we could see ourselves in?
Yeah, I certainly think so. And it's interesting to see some of the biggest Web3 critics are from the Web2 space and have certainly some business interests with defending the current paradigm. I think one of the best ways of explaining to everyday folks an example of a Web3 application that they could themselves imagine using is decentralized file storage. So a lot of people use cloud storage services like Dropbox or Google Drive or Box, etc. And those are run by companies that earn profits and have control of data for us. And some people see something better potentially through a Web3 decentralized version of Dropbox. And basically, how this could work is, and how this does work with platforms like Filecoin and others, is anyone who has a computer and has extra unused hard drive space on that computer could basically contribute that extra unused hard drive space in kind of an Airbnb like fashion. You can kind of rent it out to a decentralized cloud file storage network and be compensated for doing so. So it's a way to take underutilized capacity, extra hard drive space you're not using, and monetize that. Just like if you're away for the weekend and your flat's available and you want to earn some extra money through something like Airbnb, you could do that with your hard drive. Or there's ways to do that even with your CPU, your computational power that's underutilized, and so on. And so for me, it's an exciting way. The economist in me gets excited about putting underutilized resources to work, and also helping individuals monetize assets they have in their possession that currently aren't really easy to make money on. And that's one of the exciting things about this kind of peer-to-peer Web3 network that's being developed.
I think those are real world examples today of Web3 technologies at scale, which is pretty exciting. I think if you look into the future and peer over the horizon a little bit, you can imagine a world where I would participate potentially on a social media platform whereby the content I create, the more likes it gets, the more followers it has. People could compensate and reward me directly for doing so. And maybe a share of the advertising revenue that was generated on this platform would actually be returned to the people who spend time on it, as opposed to specifically the equity shareholders of a company, for example. So if you could imagine, essentially a social media platform running on the internet without a company actually governing it, you could see sort of the direction of travel that some of these projects are sort of pursuing. And there are many startups right now working to do just things like that: a decentralized Airbnb, a decentralized Uber, a decentralized marketplace for labor where people can pick up odd jobs and be compensated for that work without having to rely on a centralized platform that extracts fees and wealth basically from those transactions. And so it's going to take some time for these things to bake in. And I think just like every technological evolution from the first iPhone to iPhone 2, now to iPhone 13, there are incremental improvements along the way. And sometimes there's some really big improvements. And in many of these examples, we see promise. We also think it's going to take some time. And so one of the questions I think we'd like to conclude with today, Garrick, is how can crypto curious people get involved in Web3 in a more meaningful way today?
Yes, that's a great question. So, it starts with honestly opening up a wallet at a blockchain.com and acquiring your first crypto. I mean, that's the first step, and learning the basics, learning what things like private keys are and how to manage those. Or if you're not quite comfortable to take that step and manage your own private cryptographic keys, opening up a custodial account, again with a blockchain.com, and starting to look at what projects you think are interesting in the Web3 arena. And it's a vast, vast world out there. There's thousands and thousands of tokens that exist today. We've listed on our platform a number that we think are interesting and are available for you to acquire and start using. I don't know, Nick, if you want to talk about the Wallet Connect feature as well, and kind of how people who want to take the next step and engage more directly beyond just acquiring crypto is kind of a first step to getting
Yeah, at
access to
blockchain.com,
Web3.
we're really committed to making sure we build an experience that basically enables individual users to passport into this future of decentralized applications. And the Wallet Connect feature is a really important bridge that enables users of blockchain.com basically to interact directly with a variety of different DeFi protocols, a variety of different decentralized applications. And so you can link up Wallet Connect to MetaMask, among many others. And we'll be soon publishing a blog post on these feature sets as well. And we'd welcome anyone to come and test those features out and let us know how you think we can improve them too.
Thanks, Nick. So stay tuned for more Crypto Basics episodes. And to support you on your crypto journey, please come back and listen again to our podcast. And if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you're enjoying our podcast, please rate us and leave a review, as it really helps boost our visibility to more listeners. Also, if you have a topic you'd like to see us cover, please get in touch at the following email address: podcast@blockchain.com. Once again, that's podcast@blockchain.com.